Zraze scratched beneath his beak in the way that had become tantamount to ritual for contemplation. His notes on the several murders that had taken place in his little colony on this small, out-of-the-way planet had baffled him and his partner for nearly 6 weeks now. The scenes all looked similar. A member of the colonization board, deceased, a frightening head wound, found near the outskirts of the colony. It wasn't until the human detective, Griggs, had joined the fugitive hunt that a few more clues had turned up. One such clue was the small stinger Zraze held in the fold of his wing now. The human had called it a bullet, and it was a physical projectile capable of fatal wounds, and then some from medium distances. Zraze and Griggs had come to the human colony in search of the proverbial and maybe literal smoking gun, as Griggs had called it. The search had turned up new clues, but not answers like they were hoping. The only tool capable of flinging this particular stinger had been intentionally sabotaged as to be unusable prior to being brought to this planet. All the other tools, or guns, as Zraze learned they were called, were designed to fire slightly bigger stingers at faster speeds. Had they been the weapon used in the murders, Griggs had assured him, there wouldn't have been much left of the victims' bodies. Questions had been scribbled between every line on Zraze's notebook, and he struggled to answer a single one as he followed Griggs through the human colony to the hospital, where the only outspoken xenophobe lay injured and apparently incapable of committing the crimes. The doors slid quietly open and Zraze glanced up from his pad to consider the new building. While the building was fairly large, it was incredibly quiet. A receptionist sat behind a desk, pretending to look busy, while a pair of double doors flanked her. One was labelled Emergency, and the other Long-Term Care. The secretary glanced up, set aside the official-looking form she had undoubtedly been scribbling doodles on, and smiled welcomingly. "What can I do for you, sir? Oh, sirs," she amended, seeing Zraze behind the human detective's legs. "This is Detective Zraze," the human spoke up, "and I'm Detective Griggs. We're here about an injured patient, name of Frank." "Oh," the secretary chirped and clicked at her computer, before returning to them with an overly emotive face. "I'm sorry, but Frank is still unconscious. The doctor has him on the sedative to cope with the pain. We don't have many pain meds out here." "Is the doctor around?" Zraze asked. "Let me check." And she grabbed a small phone by her computer. It rang exactly 3 times before it was answered. "Dr. Lang, there's a few detectives here to see you." Okay, do you want me to send them now?" "I'm sure you were, sir." "Okay, alright, I'll let them know." She returned the phone to its cradle and smiled up at them again. "Dr. Lang is in his office now. It's the 3rd door on your left through that hallway." And she pointed over her shoulder at the long-term care doors. "And it wanted me to tell you that you threw off his concentration." She gave a small smile and conspiratorial wink as Griggs led the way through the double doors. The hallway was white and sterile with clean, shiny floors, and small stripes of colours on the floors that branched off into different doors and passages further down the hall. Unused was the word that came to mind. Behind the 3rd door on the left came the muffled sounds of argument, though the tenor seemed light. Griggs reached the door first. His long strides had left Zraze well behind, but he waited a moment for Zraze to catch back up. He knocked 2 quick beats from the door, then opened it without waiting for an answer. Inside, the room felt very reminiscent to the mayor's office. A simple desk and chairs, some filing cabinets on one side, a wall with a few photos and a degree in a frame. The difference was the middle of the room. Projected down from the ceiling was a black and white checkered pattern with rows of black and white statues facing one another. The tallest of the statues came about even with Zraze, but only a touch shorter than waist height on the human that stood behind it. "Dr. Lang?" Griggs inquired. "I'm Detective Griggs. I'm here on business." Yeah. Dr. Lang made a motion, as though he was shooing the pesky insect away. "Your business distracted me and got me mated." "Whatever," smirked another human. "You were hosed even before you made that move." "As Griggs is my witness, Laura, I will beat you next time." The human named Laura rolled her eyes, but a competitive smile took hold. "That's great, Dr. Lang," Zraze finally spoke up. "We're really rooting for you. Of course, if you could possibly spare just 10 minutes to help me solve 6 murders that have traumatized an entire colony, I'd really appreciate. I'm sure your opponent will understand." Dr. Lang blinked a few times and looked down at Zraze, evidently seeing him for the first time. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. "How can we help?" the human named Laura eventually supplied. "Frank, what happened to him?" Griggs cut right to the chase. "He hit a pocket of pop rocks and launched itself skyward. Most of the damage was done by his own equipment hitting him," Dr. Lang replied almost automatically. "What is pop rocks?" Zraze asked, scratching beneath his beak. Dr. Lang looked sheepishly up at his opponent. "Dr. Rodriguez is the geologist here. She know better than I." Dr. Laura Rodriguez lifted one tuft of fur above one of her eyes as she looked at Dr. Lang, but the look quickly faded into the same competitive grin she had earlier. She composed herself, though, before answering professionally. Poprox is just what the miners call a new compound that forms naturally on this planet. Chemically, it's mostly potassium nitrate and sulfur, much like gunpowder, but it has a few other elements mixed in. It's pretty inert when it's deep in the ground, but pockets of it are present in shallower ground too, where they get access to plenty of oxygen from the loose soil. Just takes a spark and then you've got a pretty good kick. Zraze flipped open his notebook. Where does Poprox form? All over the planet, really. It's generally pretty dispersed in the soil, but we've noticed it forms in larger clumps underneath hills mostly. My guess was that rain waters were insufficient to displace these deposits, and eventually loose soil covered them up and formed hills. I'm not sure about that though, since it's pretty much never rains here. It's the thin atmosphere, Zraze said automatically. They realised the scientists before him had probably already reasoned that themselves. So, Frank hit a pocket with his drill? Griggs prompted. Yeah, Dr. Lang took back the lead in the conversation. Probably a fairly sizable chunk. It's more of a concussive blast than a flaming blast, so he didn't get burned very bad. Still, his drill and other tools hit him at force and pretty much pushed him to the surface. The soft, loose soil probably did him a favour and took a lot of force out of his launch. Still, fractured jaw, several broken ribs, both clavicles broken, slight internal damage. Nothing I couldn't fix. More bruises than an apple that went through the dryer. He's been recovering here since then. When was that? Zraze asked, checking dates in his notebook. Maybe 2 months ago? Claire at the front desk would know exactly when. Griggs nodded at Dr. Lang, then turned to Dr. Rodriguez. This Poprox stuff, you said is like gunpowder? Sort of. More sulfur and less potassium nitrate than traditional gunpowder, I think. But the airy soil still gives the reaction plenty of oxygen. It's got a good push. Could it be used in the lieu of gunpowder for bullets? I'm not really sure, Dr. Rodriguez shrugged. You'd need to add an oxidizer, probably, if you were taking Poprox out of the ground and putting it into a casing. I imagine you could probably mix it with the powder in a normal bullet to give it a bit extra power, though. But bullets aren't really my wheelhouse, she ended, apologetically. She's more of a batteries lady, Dr. Lang added. Dr. Rodriguez humbly bowed her head. It was my scanner that found this deposit of palladium after we lost out on the last one. A faint memory, like an echo, whispered through Zraze's mind. What do you mean, lost out on the last one? Dr. Rodriguez looked confused for a moment. Well, you know, because of your colony. Zraze had remembered something Targa said about the colony architect when his case started, but he couldn't remember clearly, and even worse, it wasn't in his notebook. Could you elaborate, please? Well, sure. We scanned this planet with a probe from orbit and found a few major deposits of palladium. One was here, but the biggest one was just under the northern corner of your colony. The mayor said he tried to bargain for drilling rights, but a member of the colony board was worried about tremors or something? Dr. Rodriguez finished saying, her eyes swapping between Griggs and Zraze. Do you know anything about that deal? Griggs whispered down to Zraze. Zraze shook his head, and the mayor didn't say anything about it when we were with him. Is there a lot of geological activity here? Griggs asked Dr. Rodriguez. She shook her head. The soil settles pretty easy, and bedrock here is just compacted soil enough to form a load-bearing strata. The corals are normally active on this planet, but we ride on it like a giant waterbed. Unless an outside force acts on the ground here, it's not really going to move. Something like sinking heavy buildings? Zraze asked. She shook her head again. No, those should slide in pretty easily, like sinking through honey. Zraze glanced at Griggs for insight into what honey was, but Griggs waved him off. What would cause tremors then? He asked Dr. Rodriguez. Well, the obvious stuff like meteor impacts, shuttle crashes, and of course, it is like Frank hitting Poprox. Griggs began furiously writing in his notebook, and Zraze, not wanting to be left out, looked through his as well. Pieces were finally coming together for him. Would normal mining do it? Zraze asked the geologist. Well, extensive mining tunnels could cause minor ripples as they eventually collapse. Bigger tunnels or mines could probably cause local tremors or landslides. Thank you, doctors. You've been very helpful, Griggs said, bowing his head. He led the way out of the room and began walking quickly, even for a human. Zraze had to run to keep up as he hastily stuffed his notebook back into his coat. It makes sense now, Griggs whispered excitedly. Do you remember that ballistics report? It said the bullet had soil on it. I thought maybe it was just from going through that adobe wall and into the ground, but now I think our shooter is using this Poprox stuff. It sounds like it might even give him some extra range. But I didn't see any evidence of a human on that hill. Griggs brushed past the secretary without even a glance, and pushed out into the open air once again. And the tremors, Zraze interjected. The geologist said they were probably caused by an outside force. There have been no shuttle crashes or meteor impacts in our area for as long as I can remember. I think someone was mining the pop rocks. Griggs stopped and put a finger to his chin. The deceleration was a welcome relief for Zraze as he caught his breath. Or the palladium, Griggs theorized. All the victims were on the colonization board, right? Maybe our killer didn't want them looking for Tremors too hard. Or maybe they didn't want your colony to expand further north. Zraze looked up at Griggs. His eyes set and his crest rising slightly from his fatigued droop. I think we both know who would benefit from that. Griggs nodded sternly. Get on. Zraze obliged and clambered up the arm Griggs offered and perched on his shoulder. It was certainly a little demeaning, but Zraze didn't want Griggs to wait for him to catch up. Griggs turned and took off at a breakneck pace, and Zraze clenched tightly with his feet to remain on his mount. Zraze recollected his suspicions about the human being able to catch him by the hill before. Now Zraze was certain the human could outspeed him, even if he could fly on this planet. Rather than run down the street they came up, Griggs circled the neighbouring building and began running along the grass behind the buildings. We don't want him to see us coming, he explained. I'm pretty sure there's a back door to his office building on this side. Griggs was cut off as his leg plunged into the earth with a popping sound, and he came to an abrupt stop. Zraze was unceremoniously flung from his shoulder to land upside down in a sprawl several feet away. God damn it! Griggs grimaced. From somewhere behind and above Zraze, he could hear the laughter of the hatchlings he'd seen earlier. Out for a jog, old-timer? One of them jeered. What are you kids doing here? Griggs snapped. Shouldn't you be in school or something? It's summer, Cranky, another hatchling smirked. You're only my tunnel, a third one called out. Shut it, kid, Griggs rumbled, and the feathers on Zraze's back stood on end as the aggression from Griggs' tone set off his flight or fight response. But a thought came to him then. You made a tunnel here? Sure, Birdbrain, what's it to you? Where did you get the drill? Zraze continued, finally righting himself. The old one's got the old one's got thrown away, the smallest hatchling stammered. We get to play with them now. We like to race. Don't talk to Birdbrain, one of the other hatchlings said to the little one. That's Detective Zraze to you, runt, Griggs called from behind Zraze, but Zraze paid him no mind. How fast do they go? He asked the little one. Like a zillion miles an hour, the kid replied. Griggs extricated his leg, tested it gingerly, but then limped over to Zraze and the small gaggle of children. He flipped out a black piece of some strange fabric with a gold piece of metal affixed to it, and showed it to the oldest hatchling, the one that called Zraze Birdbrain. My partner asked how fast, Griggs growled. I don't know, mister, the kid said, backpedaling. My dad said not to go over this line or I might end up like Uncle Frank. He pointed at a gauge on the console inside the drill. Griggs leaned in to examine it as Zraze's notepad chirped with an incoming call. He forwarded it to his earpiece. Detective Zraze. Oh, good. You're alive, Tog's voice came from the earpiece. We need you back here. Soon, Tog. Human Griggs and I are on the way to detain the suspect. I think we got him, Tog. The human mayor. Did you talk to the human mayor recently? Maybe 20 minutes ago. Why? Tog sighed into the earpiece. Then it's not him, Zraze. We have another victim. Zraze's eyes widened as he looked up to Detective Griggs. Griggs' eyes were also wide, but they were not focused on Zraze. Instead, they darted between the drill and the hole he had just fallen in.